What's up, WAP? This is Mr. Liniger. Today we're going to go over it says Unit 2, but it's really Unit 3. I combined Unit 1 and 2 together. This is over the post-classical period from 600 CE to 1450 CE. There's going to be a lot of patterns here. Let's talk first about, you're going to see a large growth in trade during this time along the Silk Road, the Indian Ocean, also the Trans-Saharan trade with African empires like Ghana, Mali, Songhai, going all the way to the Swahili city-states. And the Mediterranean Ocean. When the Pax Mongolica comes, they will combine the trade routes, and what you'll see at the end of the period is a switch from land-based trade routes to ocean-based trade routes. You're going to see the continuity and change in religions through this time period. You'll see Christianity, Buddhism, and Islam especially spread throughout the world. Islam will become the first transnational religion. You'll see new classical empires fall during this time, and you'll see more, besides Islam, all the other states for the most part, and the Mongols will be smaller nation states or smaller states, not unlike the classical period. You will see the rise of nomadic invasions, the Turks, the Mongols, stuff like that. And you'll see some huge technological improvements and changes. You'll see some naval improvements, which will lead to the Age of Exploration, the compass, the caravel. You'll see gunpowder. You'll see the movement of people, the Bantu migration. The Bantu migration actually was a 1,000-year thing, but it ends during this time period. The Turks are going to move and start conquering Turkey in the Middle East. The Mongols will conquer Central Asia, East Asia, and large of the world. The Vikings will start conquering Western Europe and Northern Europe. And you'll see the spread that will also influence the disease. And you'll see the Black Death during this period. You'll see social structures change. You'll see the world become more patriarchal. One of the best examples of that is foot binding in China. Islam and Christianity originally started off, and Buddhism all started off preaching equality, but Christian and Islam will become more patriarchal throughout the period, and women will be treated as inferiors. And you'll see cultural and intellectual changes during this time period. Christianity will start to dominate Western Europe, part of North Africa. It'll start to spread into Eastern Europe, and it's going to become the major religion. Islam will go through the Middle East. It'll conquer Spain. It will go through conquer Western Africa, East Africa, a little bit of Central Africa. It'll go to Southeast Asia, and that's Dar al-Islam, which means Dar al-Islam means the world of Islam, and Islam is going to be the predominant and largest religion throughout this unit. And you'll see change in states. Western Europe will become feudal. Remember feudalism? There's not going to be one united Western European state, although Charlemagne will try. The Byzantines will be a centralized state, so will the Arab caliphates, and the Tang and Song dynasties will also be centralized, but Western Europe is going to be pretty fragmented after Rome falls. Japan and Western Europe are going to start to develop feudal societies, and towards the end of the unit, both of them are going to become stronger and start to create small, centralized states. Let's talk first about China, the Tang and the Song Empire. The Tang and the Song are going to have continuities. They're both going to have centralized rule via the Confucian bureaucracy and civil service examination. The Tang dynasty is going to be the more politically powerful one. It's going to conquer Tibet and Korea and expand into Vietnam also. It's also going to trade with Japan and influence and bring Chinese culture into Japan. The Song dynasty is going to be militarily less powerful. The Song dynasty was afraid of having generals in charge because they rebelled in the Tang, so they put bureaucrats in charge. And the Song dynasty is going to succumb and fall to the Mongols in 1279. There's also an Empress Wu, who's the first Chinese emperor under the Tang dynasty, I think. Obviously, that just shows this. The Tang dynasty was more militarily powerful. It had more land politically. The Song dynasty was probably more culturally important. That's when a lot of the economic inventions happened during the Song dynasty. Also, that's when Neo-Confucianism is going to happen. You're going to see some huge cultural developments. Buddhism became pretty popular before the Tang dynasty. The Tang dynasty and the Song are going to start to sponsor anti-Buddhist laws as a result of Neo-Confucianism and Neo-Confucianism not liking Buddhism. Confucianism wanted to be the dominant philosophy in China, although Neo-Confucianism does take aspects from Buddhism and Taoism. Gunpowder will develop in the mid 1000s under the Tang. No. Under the Song. The compass will aid maritime exploration. You're going to see the creation of the Grand Canal, which is actually under the Sui dynasty, which was only lasted 1 decade, which was before the Tang. Urbanization will increase dramatically. China will have the most urbanized area in the whole world, the most urbanized region. Also, there'll be fast-growing rice during this time, champa rice, which came from Vietnam, which is going to help to have the population expand during the Song dynasty. Remember, one of the problems with China before why there were rebellions was that the wealthy had a lot of the land. The Tang dynasty does try to do something called the equal field system, where after you die, only 1/5 of your land was hereditary and the rest was given to the government, and they would break it up. The equal field system will be successful for a while, but eventually it'll become corrupt. And in the long run, the equal field system will not stop the peasant rebellions in China. And this just shows some of the golden ages. China's going to have a new luxury good to trade, porcelain. It has landscape art, Chinese junks, which were the best ships in the world at the time. Remember, they did movable type during this time, type printing press, gunpowder and rockets, and the compass. Let's talk about the golden age of Islam, the Arabic caliphates, Dar al-Islam, the world of Islam. And if you look at them, that doesn't even include a little bit of India that they had and Southeast Asia. They were the largest empire in the world at the time. The Umayyad dynasty had tightly centralized government. Coins are going to be stamped with Arabic symbols, which will replace the Christian and Zoroastrian symbols that previously adorned Islamic coins. They established Arabic as the official language of administration. They'll favor fellow Arabs over non-Arabs, and they'll have the Arabs run the military. The Umayyad dynasty will be centralized somewhat, but the Arab nobles have a lot of power under them. They will rule the land as conquerors, and the people that they conquer don't necessarily have a lot of rights. They probably have more rights than people in Western Europe that were conquered, but not that great. They will allow the people that were conquered to have their own religion, but they'd have to pay a tax to practice their own religion, which we talked about before, which is called a jizya. The Umayyad dynasty came after the first 5 caliphates after Muhammad, the Ramadan period. They will succeed in pulling the Islamic Empire together and create a transnational Islamic state. Arabs will gain monetary benefits. They'll become the dominant power in trade during this time. Arabs are going to be appointed to positions of power as governors and administrators of conquering lands. But there will be deep resentment against conquered people against the Umayyad dynasty, and the Umayyad dynasty will be overthrown. In 685, Umayyad Caliph Ahmad Malik ibn Marwan is going to commence the work of the Dome of the Rock, which is one of the cultural things, which is in Jerusalem. It's been essentially unchanged for 13 centuries, and it remains one of the world's most beautiful, enduring architectural treasures. We've talked before about Islamic architecture. Remember dome-shaped architecture. There's its geometric patterns. They don't believe in actually having like pictures of people. That's idolatry. Cordoba, remember Umayyad dynasty also conquered Spain, and Cordoba was the largest city in Spain that the Muslims built, and it becomes actually the largest city in all of Europe and the most beautiful city. And Waze actually showed you a presentation on the Cordoba Mosque / cathedral. Women will gain some rights. They actually have more rights than Western Europe, but throughout the Umayyad and the Abbasid dynasty, women are going to see their rights decrease because of things like the Hadith. Some of the teachers of the Hadith are going to start to take power away from women, and the Umayyad and the Abbasid dynasties, they become more warlike and militaristic. You'll see the rights of women start going away, and you'll see women starting to take more and more the veil. The Abbasid Caliphate comes next. They're going to transfer the capital to Baghdad. Baghdad will become the center of commerce and learning. It's going to become a city of museums, hospitals, libraries, and mosques. Baghdad will be one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the world. It's going to be home to Jews, Muslims, and Christians. And under the Abbasid Caliphate, at first, they did grant a little bit more tolerance to non-Muslims. The Abbasid dynasty will last longer than the Umayyad dynasty, but towards the end of their dynasty, just like the Zhou dynasty, they'll be very decentralized. A lot of local sultans or warlords will be ruling in their name, but really they're the ones in control. By 800s, Baghdad had probably near 500,000 people, which was as big as Rome during the Roman Empire, and it was the largest city in the world outside of China. This period is known as the Golden Age of Islamic civilizations, when scholars of the Muslim world made most important contributions to science, humanities, medicine, mathematics, astronomy, chemistry, literature, and more. They're going to dominate science, math, and technology, Muslims will, and trade. They're the most powerful civilization in the world. During this time, they're going to translate a lot of Greek writers and Greek scientists and Greek mathematicians and rediscover a lot of the Greek thought. Most of the famous Muslim scholars from the 9th through 13th century had their educational roots from Baghdad. They worked together to translate Greek manuscripts. They studied the works of Aristotle, Plato, Hippocrates. They'll be the best in medicine, Euclidean geometry, and Pythagoras. This just shows some of the Abbasid art and architecture, the Great Mosque of Samarra. They were really big on calligraphy, paintings. You should remember that Diocletian divided the Roman Empire into two, between the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire, which is going to call itself the Byzantine Empire, is going to pay the barbarians to attack the Western Roman Empire instead, and it's going to be the only remaining part of the Roman Empire. It's going to have a centralized state. The most famous emperor you need to know is Justinian. He's going to create a legalized code, which is based off of the Roman 12 tables. He's called Justinian's Code, which is the basis of a lot of civil law in Western Europe. He will try to recapture Western Europe and create a unified Roman Empire again, but it'll be unsuccessful. He had a very powerful wife who helped with arts and learning. The Byzantines were really big about mosaics, named Theodora. Justinian will conquer parts of the Roman Empire, North Africa, Italy, and southern Spain. He will unite the empire under Justinian's Code, which is also called Corpus Juris Civilis, which is going to be based on Roman law, individual rights, and Greek will be the official language. He will beautify Constantinople. He'll build the Hagia Sophia, government buildings, roads, walls, public baths, and the Byzantine Empire will be the strongest empire within Western Europe. Underground reservoirs, supported art, sculptures, mosaics, etc. It will be an autocratic rule. It's not a theocracy. He's not considered God. They're Christian, but they are an absolute monarchy. He's the sole ruler of the government. And remember, there's a term we talked about before, Caesaropapism. This emperor is the leader of the government and the church. And he was, the Byzantines under Justinian and after him are going to start to be Caesaropapist. Theodora, his wife, will work with peace with Persia. She'll fight for women's rights, build hospitals and schools for the poor. Also pretty scandalous if you remember us talking about her. Economic developments for the Byzantines. It's going to be the center for Silk Road imports and part of the Silk Road trade. Cultural developments. The Eastern Orthodox split is going to split in the Great Schism of 1054. Remember, the Pope and the Patriarch had different views on different things about the power of the Pope. Whether the Bishop of Rome was the head of the church, or whether all the bishops were equal, but the Bishop of Rome was just the first one. Whether they should have unleavened bread or leavened bread, whether priests should be able to marry. There was a lot of political differences also. Both the Pope and the Byzantine Empire were trying to conquer land in Western Europe. And in 1054, they're going to split off. Eastern Orthodoxy is going to spread through Eastern Europe and eventually going to get Russia to convert to the Eastern Orthodox Church. And you definitely need to know the Schism of 1054, the Great Schism. Western Europe is going to be very decentralized. Feudalism will prevail. Please remember how feudalism works, how you have a king. He gives land to local nobles. In return, they swear loyalty to him, and they provide an army, because the king doesn't have an army, and some taxes. It's a system based on obligation. The nobles will then give some land to knights who would fight for them. And at the very bottom were the serfs who were bound to the land, who were offered protection. During this time, you're going to see a lot of the peasant class switch to serfdom in order to get protection. You're going to see the rise of castles, which were used by knights and nobles to kind of terrorize the countryside and try to gain power over lands that are near their castle. The Catholic Church is the single strongest unifying factor across Western Europe, and it was really the only thing to survive the fall of the Roman Empire. You're going to see develops of serfdom and manorialism. Remember manorialism? It was the self-sufficient economic communities around the castle. Serfs are going to be obligated to give a percentage of their crops to the lord in exchange for a plot of land and protection. It's the whole idea of feudalism. Manors will operate as self-sufficient communities. and most people, and there's not going to be a lot of surplus in agriculture, so most people will be tied to agriculture. There's not going to be a huge artisan community or huge towns in Western Europe during this time. Social developments for Western Europe. Nobility of birth is determines one's social status. In the upper classes, you'll have like the dukes, the counts, the kings, the princes. Marriage is going to be the key to political power. The only rights women really have in Western Europe is going to be based on who they marry, and they'll have some say not in who they marry, but based on who they marry, and if they're noble, they'll have more kind of power or like honor, I guess. Remember the whole civil code of chivalry, the cultural code of chivalry is going to be big during this time. Religious and moral authority is going to be in the hands of the Catholic Church and the Pope. Japan's going to also be a decentralized feudal state from 600 to 1000. This is before the beginning of the rise of feudalism. This is under Heian Japan. There were attempts to centralize Japan at first, but they're going to be unsuccessful during the first millennia. The Japanese also attempt to fashion their bureaucracy in the image of Chinese Confucian model. The Japanese did go through sinification, but they were probably the most resistant to full-heartedly copying the Chinese. You will see the rise of feudalism eventually. You're going to get a military figure, the high military figure that's going to be able to unite Japan is going to be called the shogun. Remember, Japanese feudalism is different than European feudalism. In Japanese feudalism, the shogun does have more power than the Western European king. Below the shogun are the daimyos, the princes, and below them are the samurai, the version of the knights. The Japanese shogun and the Japanese feudalism has more political power. Japan will have an island configuration that's going to make it be isolated from European encroachment and from even other Asian encroachment. You're going to see a development of Japan, which still exists today, the unique Japanese religion, Shintoism. Everything in nature possesses a spirit, even rice does. All natural forces govern life. Traditional Japanese customs are going to combine with Buddhism. Shintoism was not a religion that Shintoism would allow other religions to exist. So Shintoism will blend with Buddhism to produce Zen Buddhism. Contacts with China are going to be halted during the Heian period, as the Japanese were encouraged to express the traditional Japanese culture. During the Heian period, women are going to dominate literature. The tales of the Genshi about the geisha will be written by Lady Musaki. Women are going to enjoy considerable legal and economic rights compared to later periods and compared to the rest of Asia especially. Japan's going to be a traditionally agrarian economy with local artisan class of weavers, carpenters, and ironworkers. Most people will work on land that was owned by other people and had to pay an in-kind of tax to harvest on a yearly basis. We will see the rise of nomadic empires or nomadic invaders, the Vikings, the Turks, and the Mongols. Dun dun dun! Let's talk first about the Vikings. The Vikings are going to be a nomadic group from Northern Europe called Scandinavia, which makes up Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. They're going to do seasonal raids and attack parts of France, England, Western Europe, even Italy. And the Vikings are actually going to conquer northern France, which is going to be called Normandy. They'll eventually conquer England, and they'll even conquer part of Italy. They're going to be at first very well known for destroying churches, raping and pillaging, raping nuns, destroying, killing priests, very violent. Eventually, they will convert to Christianity. They're also going to be known for their small maneuverable boats. Also, the Vikings are considered the first settlers of Russia. They're going to explore the Atlantic Ocean. They'll actually get communities in Iceland, Greenland, all the way to Canada, and northeast coast of the United States, which won't stay. They'll establish settlements in Scotland, northern France, and Eastern Europe. Over the time, the Vikings will adopt Christianity, like I said, and they're going to be absorbed into the larger European feudal order, and they will become feudalistic. William the Conqueror, who conquers England, was a descendant of the Vikings. The next one is the Slugturks. The Slugturks were a branch of the Turks. They were pastoral nomads from Central Asia. They were often hired as Muslim leaders as mercenaries. They're going to invade Baghdad in 1055 and took over the Abbasid Caliphate. They still say the Abbasid Caliphate is around and they're listening to him, but really they're the ones that are in control. The elite troops of the Slugturks were called the Mamelukes, who were like the castrated soldiers. By 1071, the Slugturks are able to push the Byzantines out of most of Turkey, which is Anatolia. The Afghan Turks were Muslims also. They're going to start to do a series of raids into India in the 10th century, and they're going to bring Islam into India and Pakistan. By the late 12th century, the Afghan Turks are going to settle in northern India and begin the Delhi of Sultanate, which will last till 1526, until Timur the Lame conquers and destroys the Delhi Sultanate. The other one is the Mongols, my favorite. Mongols. The Mongols were led by Central Asian steppes of nomadic group. Genghis Khan led them. First, he had to unite the tribes together. Remember, there are often a lot of blood feuds amongst the tribes to get them to unite. He will then conquer China. He'll conquer Russia. He'll conquer the Middle East. He never conquers Western Europe. He doesn't think it was worth the time, but he creates the largest empire of their time. The Mongols were known for having great archers, for being great horsemen, for being able to fire the arrows very accurately over time. They're also known for their use of terror and military strategy. They were illiterate. They used people from other civilizations they conquered as like doctors. So they would use like Chinese doctors. They would use Germans that they conquered as for metallurgy as blacksmiths. They're going to establish the largest continental land empire in the history of the world. And their greatest strength was mobility via horses. And they were pretty harsh. If you submitted to Pax Mongolica, you were allowed to live and survive. But if you tried to rebel, your whole town would burn, you would die, and all those that knew you would die. After Genghis Khan's death, the Mongol Empire is going to break up. You're going to have the Great Khanate, which is going to be called the Yuan Dynasty in China. The Changati Khanate, which is the one of Central Asia. The Ilkhanate Khanate, which is in the Middle East. And the Khanate of the Golden Horde, which is going to be the Russian Golden Horde Empire. Before his death, he divides into 4 empires. Under Russia, remember the Russians, after they're conquered by the Mongols, are going to be kind of take a step back. They're going to be technologically behind Western Europe and economically behind. They're going to be primarily agricultural, and they're never going to go through the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, unlike Western Europe. They will benefit from trade since they're part of that at first. So the Russian nobles at most will be pretty rich. The taxes on the peasants will be heavy. They're going to be collected by Russian bureaucrats. The Russian bureaucrats are going to be located in a new city, which is Moscow, which is going to become the capital of Russia. Under China, the Yuan dynasty will be formed by Kublai Khan, who's going to defeat the last part of the Song dynasty. He'll establish a centralized rule with using Persian bureaucrats. He tries to get rid of Confucianism, which makes a lot of the Chinese hate him, and he eliminates the civil service system, which is really unique because for the most part, the Mongols actually respected local culture. And the Chinese will be segregated from the Mongol population. The Middle East was the Ilkhanites. The Mongols in the Middle East will convert to Islam for the most part. They'll employ local bureaucrats and convert to Islam by 1295. The local rulers will be kept in place as long as sufficient tax revenues were delivered to Mongol authorities. For the most part, as long as the Mongols got their money, they weren't interested in interfering and trying to destroy. They will expand into Africa, but they'll be stopped from conquering all of Africa when the Mamelukes, who were the Slugturks, will defeat them in Egypt. For a century, the continent of Asia will be united under the Mongol rule, resulting in peace and increase in trade and cultural interaction. The benefit of this peace will be debatable. I mean, because there's a lot of life, 100 million people die, not 100 million, but tens of millions of people die as a result of the Mongol terror. But it does create the first unified government. They create a unified currency, unified trade laws, a postal service, and they do bring peace to the people that are willing to submit to Mongol rule. The Mongols are going to decline for many reasons. There's going to be, despite great military accomplishments, the Mongol Empire will only last 3 to 4 generations, 300 to 400 years. They are great conquerors, but they're going to be horrible administrators. Over time, they will start to adapt to foreign cultures, and they're going to start losing what makes them Mongols. They will overexpand. They try to conquer Japan, and they lose a large part of their naval force when a tsunami or a divine wind destroys their whole navy that was sailing to Japan. There will be rivalry among the Mongol leaders, especially after the Mongol dynasty split into 4. And by 1350, most of the Mongol territories had been conquered by other armies. Africa during this time is going to be interacting and also changing. Like I said, there'll be dramatic changes in Africa during this time period. The Trans-Saharan trade route will be a dominant trade route, and you're going to see some African civilizations start to pop up. Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. Christianity will convert large populations in both regions. That's especially when the Europeans start to conquer at the very end of this unit. Both areas are going to be ruled by centralized governments, and for the most part, West Africa, East Africa will be Muslim through most of this unit. Large percentages of the population will convert to Islam. A lot of the Islam is going to be spread through trade. A lot of the merchants and the nobles will become Muslim for better trade discounts. And you'll see the rise of Sufis, the Islamic mystics, who will help spread Islam to Africa and Southeast Asia. Christianity will influence parts of East Africa like Ethiopia, which had happened since the last unit. West Africa was probably had the most centralized governments, but East Africa is going to be organized into city-states, the Swahili city-states. The areas are not going to be isolated, but they will be interacting extensively, especially through trade. Large parts of the population will convert to Islam, but native beliefs were incorporated into Islam, not eliminated. Ghana is the first empire you need to know. It lasts from 500 to 1200 CE. Commerce is going to be the base of the empire. It's going to control and secure trade routes through the trans-Saharan trade. They'll trade in ivory, slave, horses, cloth, and salt. Conversion by the emperors to Islam will be improved diplomatic and economic relations between West Africa and the Islamic world. Mali is going to be another huge Islamic empire from 1235 to 1400s. It will control and tax gold, salt, and gold and salt will be its major trade route. Timbuktu will be the largest city in Africa, and it's going to become the cultural center of African Islam. You should know that Sudiata, the Lion King, is the one that considered the founder of Mali, and his grandson, Mansa Musa, is the first African prince that took the Hajj to Mecca and brought back Islamic scholars with him and helped create the first colleges in Africa and the first Islamic schools. And the Mali Empire will be absorbed into Songhai. You'll see some Christianity in North and East Africa, Ethiopia, parts of Egypt that aren't conquered. A lot of these parts of Christianity will be Coptic Christian, which was one of the heresies. People say that St. Mark is the one that preached in East Africa during the Roman period and got them to convert to Christianity. And North and East Africa, really this area, is going to be the only area that remains Christian for the most part. You need to know the East African city-states with Swahili city-states. They're going to be really big and involved in trade along the Indian Ocean. These areas will convert to Muslim. A lot of these people are originally Bantu people, and they're going to be a combination of Bantu and Arabs. And even like Swahili city-states, it means combination of. Their language was a mix of Arabic and Bantu, Swahili. During the 900s, Islamic merchants are going to trade gold and slaves and ivory for pottery, glass, and textiles from Persia, India, and China. As traders increased, so will the wealth in Swahili city-states. The ruling elite and wealthy merchants will convert to Islam, but they won't completely give up their religious and cultural traditions. For them, Islam means legitimacy, alliances, and more money. You will see crusades going on during this time period. Starting with 1096, the first crusade will be launched for the Christians to try to conquer the Holy Land from the Slugturks. They actually will conquer the Jerusalem, but by the fourth crusade, all the land the Christians will be conquered will be taken back by the Muslims. And there's going to be a series of religious wars between the Christian feudal states and the Muslim empires. The earliest crusades were originally truly intended to fight for God and Church. The first crusade was launched because the Turks they destroyed one of the cathedrals in Jerusalem. The later crusades are going to be about politics and greed. And if you remember, one of the crusades, it was meant to attack the Muslims, but one of the crusades, the Christians actually attacked the Byzantine Empire. But even though the Crusades weren't successful, it's going to allow the Christians to start opening up and have more interactions with the Muslims. They'll be introduced to Muslim goods and Muslim trades. It's going to lead to an incorporation of trade and exploration. They'll also be introduced to some of the Muslim technology. It's going to bring about the decline of feudalism and the end of the Dark Ages. It will lead to cultural diffusion between Muslim and Christian worlds. Crusades will be a series of holy wars against the infidels. And the Holy Land of Palestine, Jerusalem. Pope Urban III was the first one that launched the Crusades in 1095 when he called for Christians to take up and seize the Holy Land. After the first Crusades, the Christians will capture territories surrounding Jerusalem and establish little feudal states within the Middle East. But the disorganized Muslim forces are going to become reorganized and start reconquering the land they lost. Their most famous leader is going to be Saladin, who's going to be a Muslim ruler, who's going to reconquer a lot of the land and reconquer Jerusalem for the Muslims. As a result of the Crusades, though, Italian merchants will start to have more interactions with the Christians, and Italian merchants will start to greatly profit and introduce Islamic trade goods into the Middle East, into Western Europe. During the High Middle Ages, which was 1000 to 1450, this is when Western Europe starts to get its stuff together, stops being feudalistic, and you start to see the rise of nation-states becoming more powerful. This is also when a lot of the technological and economic and cultural improvements happen in Western Europe. You're going to see increased trade as a result of commerce with the Muslims. In the heart of Muslims, you'll see the increased development in culture with the beginning of Gothic architecture and Romanesque architecture before that. You'll see the first little nation state where they try to tie Western Europeans together, called the Holy Roman Empire. You'll see economic trade unions form, like the Hanseatic League. You will see rich city-states in Western Europe, so not everything is going to become nation-states. The Italian city-states are going to probably be the wealthiest areas there. Florence, Genoa. Florence becomes one of the richest and one of the most beautiful places in all of Western Europe. And that's where the Renaissance will start. You will see the formation of guilds during this time. Guilds were like the early version of unions. That's how, if I was a blacksmith, there'd be a blacksmith guild in the city. I would have to apprentice for a certain amount of years. They would tell me the secrets, and most of the guilds would charge the same amount of rates. It was a way for them to protect their trade and prevent competition from coming. Guilds will dominate the Middle Ages in Western Europe. Western Europe will start to recover economically from the Dark Ages. Italian trade will help that out. You'll also see new types of economic develops, like the three-field system, the use of fertilizer, the horseshoe, another trade route, another economic developments in Western Europe. At first, they're only going to have raw materials to trade, but as the unit goes on, they are going to start to go through commercialization and urbanization. And right as this unit ends, you're going to start to see a little bit of urbanization and a little tiny bit of industry in Western Europe. And depending on where you are in Western Europe, in France and England, it was wool they were producing. In other parts, it was leather. In Italy. One of the major trading groups during this time was the Hanseatic League, which was a group of small German city-states which united together and formed an association. They're going to dominate central government and be one of the richest areas in the world. The merchants in the trading towns will unite together to protect themselves and band together. And they'll obtain security and exclusive trading routes, and a monopoly in trades will allow the towns to grow closer. By the mid-1300s, a lot of these German towns will be part of the Hanseatic League. Eventually, the League will be able to control trade in the Baltic and North Sea. It's going to make navigation safer to stop piracy, which was a big deal in the Middle Ages. They'll build lighthouses, and they'll train sailors. At the end of this unit, we will start to see the rise of the Iberian civilization, Spain and Portugal. As Spain's going through Reconquista, the Portuguese are becoming a dominant maritime empire. During the Middle Ages, the Europeans loved spices, and they had to get that through the Muslims from India. The Portuguese are going to start to try to find an alternative route to from Africa to get to the spices. Prince Henry the Navigator is an important person you need to know. He'll found a school for navigational studies and to teach sailors how to sail, obviously. He'll also help incorporate and take some ideas from the Chinese and the Muslims, like the compass and the caravel, which is going to be one of the dominant ships in the age of exploration. And he'll hire some sailors to trans-navigate Africa to go along the African coast of Vasco da Gama and to get to India. And that's what I was talking about right here. Vasco da Gama, how he went here so they don't have to trade with the Muslims anymore. They can go straight and get the spices directly from India. This shows some medieval trade routes. And for the most part, Venetian, Genoese are both in Italy. Hanseatic routes. It is going to be a lot of this time, especially towards the end of the unit, the 15th century, you're going to see ocean route start to dominate over land routes. You will see the start of seeing the spread of plagues and the Black Death. The Mongols, with their conquering of China and their spread of the conquest of all the land where the Silk Road is, are eventually going to bring a disease with them, the bubonic plague, which will cause like up to 200 million people to die. Western Europe loses 1/3 to 1/2 of its population. It's going to decimate Western Europe, but over time there's going to be less workers. So the workers that still survive from the Black Death are going to be able to negotiate for better wages. It kind of helps to end feudalism. So in a way, the Black Death was actually a good thing. Black Death ruled. But the Black Death will also lead to anti-Semitism. A lot of Christians blame the Jews for no reason at all. And it's going to see some Jews died. Some towns killed all their Jews in their population. You will see missionary campaigns during this time. China, Buddhism will be spread through China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and India. Theravada Buddhism, which was a strict form of Buddhism, which was less popular, is going to go through Southeast Asia. And Mahayana Buddhism, which was the Buddhism that thought Buddha was God, which is more focused on rituals and meditation, will spread through China, Japan, India. Because Buddhism lacks an organized church, it's going to be able to merge with existing local customs, and it will be fine for Buddhism to merge with things like Shintoism. So there's going to be religious syncretism. But the lack of an organized structure is also going to contribute to its loss of popularity in Central Asia during the time of Islamic expansion. Christianity will also spread during this time. It's going to spread through Western Europe, Eastern Europe. You're going to see the rise of religious holidays like Veneration of the Saints, Veneration of the Virgin Mary. You'll even see Christianity spread through parts of Asia with Nestorianism, but really Christianity doesn't really start to spread in detail to China up until the 1800s with people like St. Francis Xavier. Merchants will spread Nestorian Trinity as far as Central Asia and China, but it'll never be a big deal. There'll be small communities, but China will not become dominant in Christianity. And really for a big reason that is a lot of the cultural values of equality and a lot of the cultural norms of Christianity were not really compatible with Chinese culture and Chinese tradition at that time. Islam will also spread during this time. We talked about that before. It's going to spread through Africa, West, East, North, Central Africa, up to Southeast Asia and India and Central Asia. It will allow other religions to exist as long as they pay the head tax. It's going to use trade and missionaries called the Sufis to help spread their religion. Lower class individuals will be welcomed in Islam, and Islam will focus on charity and equality at first. And if you look at this, definitely largest religion is Islam. And if you look at it just comparing the Sunni and the Shia, the Sunni was definitely the more predominant religion, except in Iran right here. Marco Polo is probably the most important Western traveler who's going to go on the Silk Road. He's going to write books about the Mongols and about how big China was in the Yuan dynasty. He's going to reach further than any of his predecessors beyond Mongolia to China. He'll become advisor to Kublai Khan. He'll travel the whole of China and return to tell the tale, which is going to become the greatest travelogue. Ibn Battuta was the Muslim version of Marco Polo. He's going to be born in Tangier, Africa, in Morocco. He's going to travel all parts of the world. He'll travel to all parts of the Islamic Empire. He'll travel to China, the Byzantine Empire, and southern Russia. And he's going to be the most important person during this time. And this just shows the different travel routes that both of them took. Cross-cultural exchanges are going to be a big thing during this unit. You're going to see commercial and economic cross-cultural exchanges, militaristic, diplomatic, or missionary. You'll see cultural diffusion, songs and stories, religious ideas, philosophical views, technology, and scientific knowledge. The whole idea of Neo-Confucianism is cultural diffusion. Confucianism blends with Buddhism and Taoism. You'll see the spread of crops, especially in the Muslim Empire, since they have a huge landmass they conquered. You're going to see different types of crops and fruit brought to all parts of the Muslim empires, like sugarcane, oranges, and even European crops are going to be brought to Sicily, and Muslim crops will be brought to Italy and Spain, which is going to lead to the use of slave labor amongst the Muslims. You're going to see the spread and development of gunpowder from the Mongols. The Chinese had created gunpowder before, but the Mongols are going to help spread it, and eventually the gunpowder will be brought to the Western Europeans. It's going to lead to promoting economic development, enable mariners and explorers. Remember, the Muslims, through the Chinese, are going to help bring Chinese technology to the Western Europeans, which will directly lead to the age of exploration. The last thing is going to be the recovery and Renaissance in Asia and Europe. The Mongols are in collapse in 1368, and the Ming Dynasty will be established. The first peasant, Honggua, was a peasant, and he's going to establish a dynasty. He was the only Chinese peasant to become an emperor. They're going to try to erase memories of Chinese occupation. They're going to be very conservative. They're going to reinstitute Neo-Confucianism and the Confucian bureaucracy. They're going to originally allow Zheng He, who was a Chinese explorer, to sail all the way through Africa. He probably could have gotten to Western Europe, but they're going to be very conservative and xenophobic, and they're eventually going to stop exploration. They're going to become very internalized. They'll create the Yongle Encyclopedia to promote Chinese traditions. Jesuit missionaries will reach China, like Matteo Ricci, who introduced European technology and clocks, but Christianity is not going to catch on. And we'll talk a little bit more about that next unit. We talked about the comeback tour 7 between 1405 to 1403, which was the explorations of Zheng He. Massive naval and trade fleets headed by Zheng He, a Chinese Muslim eunuch. He's going to establish tributary relations with regions in the Eastern Hemisphere. The voyage is going to end in 1433 as Confucian bureaucrats claimed that the foreign investment had no value to China. It was wasteful, and they were worried about interfering with foreign lands. China was the Middle Kingdom, the center of the world, and everybody else were barbarians. China's going to become more conservative and more internalized, and they're going to start to fall behind technologically really after this unit. This shows the voyages of my boy Zheng He. By the 1400s, we're going to see regional states develop in Western Europe, and we're going to start to see powerful monarchies. Citizens are going to start to be taxed directly, and the king's going to provide his own army, which is going to lead to the death of feudalism. The Spanish Reconquista is going to push the Moors out of Iberia, and Spain will be all Catholic. Italian city-states are going to grow wealthy, and Italy will still have large city-states and will not be united. There will be competition between nations and innovative changes in weapons and wars like gunpowder, cannons, and the most famous war during this time is going to be the 100-Year War between France and England. During this time, at the very end of the unit, you're going to see a global shift of power as Western Europe starts to become the most powerful nation, which it had not been ever since the Roman Empire. One of the intellectual developments that's going to help that out is the Renaissance. Remember, there were two Renaissance, the Italian, which was more secular, and the Northern Renaissance, which was more religious. It's going to be sparked by renewed contact of classical and Greek writing, where they get the Greek writing from the Muslims and from the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines and the Muslims both had kept the Greek and Roman writings. There's going to be more trade, and increased wealth is going to lead to more resources, and you're going to see more and more beautiful churches being built. One of the major philosophies in the Renaissance is humanism, stress the importance of human existence. It's going to be reflected in art and literature, and this is when you get a lot of the famous artists, Michelangelo, Donatello, Raphael, Leonardo, Splinter. Italy's favorable trading location is going to give rise to the Renaissance. One of the wealthiest banking families that's going to dominate a lot of Western Europe is the Medici family. You'll see a rise of painting, science, and sculpture. And right after the Renaissance, along the same time, is going to be the scientific revolution. The Europes are also going to be starting to explore during this time. They'd gotten naval technology from the Chinese. The questioning spirit and the youthful and the optimistic spirit of the exploration of the Renaissance is going to lead for them to start to try to find new land. Major motivations for exploration: gold, God, and glory. The Portuguese are going to find a trading route and start creating trading forts along the African coast. Spain, and they're going to conquer parts of Africa for trading towns. The Spanish under Ferdinand and Isabella are going to give money to Columbus to start a voyage to try to discover a new route to India, and he's going to land in the Caribbean and find, quote unquote, the New World in 1492. Some of the other dominant civilizations during this time are the Mayans. We talked about them last unit because they spread through both civilizations. The Mayans were the largest, at the early part, the largest Latin American civilizations. We'll talk about two more, the Incas and the Aztecs. A lot of the ideas from the Aztecs they got from the Mayans, who they got from the Olmecs. They were an agricultural economy. They had a lack of large domesticated animals for labor. They had a ritualistic polytheism, and they did practice bloodletting. And remember, bloodletting was very important to Latin American civilizations, human sacrifice. They had urban areas with thousands of people, independent city-states linked by trade. They were not a unified empire. And they had a staple diet of maize, which is corn, and beans. The Aztecs were also known as the Mexican people. You remember the whole little legend about how the Aztecs were formed? They were from 1400 to 1521 until the Spanish under Cortez conquered them. The Aztec culture is going to be characterized by a militant warrior class who are going to create a tribute empire. Remember, the Mongols also were a tributary empire, but they're going to conquer other areas in Mexico and Central America and force them to pay tribute and use a lot of those people for human sacrifice. The Mayans also did that, where they would capture people specifically for human sacrifice. They're going to be ruled by several despots. They will have a priestly class, and the priestly class will have a lot of power under the Aztecs, who will be responsible for doing the human sacrifice. Yeah. They'll have a large urban capital, Tenochtitlan, which 1,500,000 people, and that's where the little bird supposedly landed on the cactus with the snake in its talon or whatever. Okay, they will have a decentralized network of city-states that pay tribute. They were pretty harsh to the people, and as a result, a lot of the areas that the Aztecs conquered will join up with the Spanish under Cortez and help to overthrow the Aztecs. Warfare and disease will play a major role in the extinction of the Aztec people. Last one was the Incans. The Incans were a little bit more peaceful than the Aztecs. They also had a large empire that went through most of South America. They were a predecessor of the Chavin cult. They're going to create an empire by the 1300s. They'll be from 1400 to 1540. And they'll be conquered by Pizarro. The Inca Empire is going to grow into a stretch of land that covers 3,000 miles of land from north to south. The Incas are going to be able to unite all that land through building Inca roads, which are pretty famous. They do create a centralized empire with the capital in Cuzco, which is in present-day Peru. If you remember, the Incas, they didn't believe in individual land ownership, so they had a form of socialism where the government owned the land and stuff. They had an extensive irrigation agricultural economy that adapted to the rugged terrain of the mountains. They built terraces for farming and extensive networks for roads. The Incan roads were pretty important. They did have a polytheistic religion, sun worship, but they had an idea of like heaven, hell, and even purgatory. Sin also was in there. They were a patriarchal economy, a patriarchal society. They did practice some form of bloodletting, but it wasn't as extreme as the Aztecs or the Mayans. They had a privileged class of nobles who would, after they conquered the land, would become the governors of the new states. The royal ancestors were revered and worshipped, and they practiced mummification. They had no written language system, but if you remember, we talked about Quipu before, which was a system of colored knotted ropes to keep records. And they will fall to the Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro. All right, kids, that's everything I have for this review for this week. Remember to do the questions for Unit 3 review questions, and there's a good amount. Deuces.